The plane hummed softly as passengers settled into their seats. Carry-ons were tucked away, flight attendants smiled politely, and the atmosphere was calm, the kind of ordinary, uneventful flight that almost feels like it will pass unnoticed. Almost. Steven Seagal stepped onto the plane, moving with that quiet, effortless presence that only comes from someone who has mastered both body and mind. He wore a simple jacket, sunglasses perched on his face, and carried nothing more than a small bag. To most, he looked like any other traveler. To anyone paying attention, though, there was an aura, subtle, almost invisible, but undeniably commanding. Not everyone noticed, of course. A passenger a few rows ahead was already annoyed, restless, rude, and eager to assert dominance over anyone who inconvenienced him. He had been fuming about the cramped legroom and the slow boarding process. When he saw Seagal walk past, something in him snapped. Maybe it was the calm way Seagal moved, or the faint smirk as he adjusted his bag. Either way, the passenger decided he wouldn't let this man slide by without confrontation. He elbowed slightly, muttering complaints under his breath. "What's this guy thinking?" he hissed. Then, louder, just enough for nearby passengers to hear, he grumbled about being bumped and in everyone's way. Seagal didn't react. Not a flinch, not a glance, just a calm, unwavering stare straight ahead. Every step he took was measured, deliberate. His presence alone began to shift the atmosphere. Other passengers noticed the tension. Some straightened in their seats, curious. Others reached for their phones, sensing a story unfolding. But the rude passenger wasn't done. Frustration turned into aggression. "Hey," he barked, shoving Seagal lightly. It was not a severe push, but it was deliberate, a challenge. Seagal paused, turned slowly, and looked directly at him. His expression didn't change, but the room seemed to pause with him. Every passenger could feel it, that subtle shift in energy, the quiet, dangerous calm that only comes from someone who knows exactly how far they can be pushed. And then came the words, sharp, impatient, and dripping with entitlement. "Who do you think you are?" What happened next would shock every passenger on that plane. The plane's cabin, once calm, now carried an invisible tension, thick enough to make every passenger shift in their seat. Some exchanged uneasy glances. Others leaned slightly forward, curiosity sparking behind their eyes. They had just witnessed a minor altercation, but no one could have predicted the storm that was about to unfold. The rude passenger, already frustrated by the flight and convinced he needed to assert dominance, now decided to escalate. A shove, just enough to startle, was followed by muttered insults. "Who do you think you are?" "Move aside," he demanded, pointing his finger aggressively at Seagal. Seagal didn't flinch. His voice remained calm, measured, and almost unnervingly quiet. "Sir, there's no need for this," he said. "Please just take your seat." But calm words fell on deaf ears. The passenger's pride and impatience wouldn't allow a simple resolution. He leaned closer, attempting to intimidate, expecting compliance, expecting fear. The atmosphere in the plane shifted. Whispers spread among the passengers. "Why is he being so rude? Who is that guy?" Some passengers began recording with their phones, instinctively sensing that something remarkable was happening. Every tap on a screen added weight to the tension, the knowledge that actions now were being watched and documented. The rude passenger noticed the attention, but instead of tempering his behavior, it fueled his arrogance. He raised his voice. "You think you can just ignore me? You're not special. Just sit down." Seagal's expression didn't change. His eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the passenger carefully. He wasn't angry, not yet, but the energy radiating from him made the entire row feel a subtle, unspoken warning. Everyone instinctively leaned back, sensing that the situation could either explode or resolve with one calculated move. Then came the slap. It wasn't hard, but deliberate, meant to humiliate, to assert dominance. Gasps echoed through the cabin. A few passengers clutched their seats, while others instinctively raised their phones to capture the moment. The plane fell into a hushed tension. Even the flight attendants froze, unsure whether to intervene immediately. Seagal didn't retaliate. Not yet. His calm, unreadable gaze locked onto the passenger. The sheer restraint, the controlled energy in that stare, made the rude passenger pause for just a fraction of a second. That split second, however, was enough for everyone else to feel the power shift. And then Seagal spoke, quiet, almost serene, but with unmistakable authority. "Sir, there's no need for violence. Please respect yourself and those around you." The rude passenger's confidence wavered slightly. Murmurs spread across the cabin. Every passenger, from the front row to the back, was leaning in, watching this unfolding battle of wills. Some began commenting quietly, whispering their disbelief and awe. Before the next move, tell me, where are you watching from? Which city or country? Comment below. The air was electric. Some passengers were rooting silently for Seagal. Others were simply mesmerized by the quiet tension, by the way one man could command a room without raising his voice. The rude passenger, meanwhile, was starting to realize that this was no ordinary confrontation. And still, Seagal said nothing more, letting the situation stretch, letting the rude passenger stew in the growing awareness that he had miscalculated completely. Every second of silence only heightened the suspense, trapping the audience, mentally and emotionally, in anticipation of what would happen next. The cabin, once routine, had transformed into a theater of silent tension, each passenger holding their breath, wondering, who will break first? Will this escalate or end in utter humiliation? What happened next would push the rude passenger to the edge and shock everyone on board. The tension in the plane's cabin had reached a palpable edge. Every passenger was watching, some frozen in their seats, some leaning forward, phones in hand, anticipating what might happen next. The rude passenger, however, had not yet grasped the gravity of the situation. To him, this was still a game, a chance to assert dominance over someone who appeared calm and compliant. He leaned even closer, jabbing a finger toward Seagal. "You think you can just sit there and ignore me?" he shouted, his voice rising over the low hum of the airplane engines. "I won't be treated like I'm nothing." The cabin fell silent. Flight attendants exchanged worried glances. Passengers instinctively edged away from the confrontation, yet every eye remained fixed on the scene unfolding before them. There was a strange, hypnotic quality to it, a clash of wills where one side exuded chaos and aggression, and the other, quiet, unyielding control. Seagal didn't flinch. Not a twitch. Not a single gesture betrayed irritation. He simply studied the man in front of him, his eyes calm but piercing, as if seeing the passenger's insecurities, weaknesses, and fear all at once. Every passenger in the cabin could sense the power emanating from him, not through shouting or action, but through the sheer weight of his presence. "Sir," Seagal said, his voice low and unwavering, "I've done nothing to provoke you. This behavior will only make the situation worse, for you, for everyone around us, and for yourself." The rude passenger's chest heaved with anger. He shoved Seagal lightly again, louder this time, an action meant to provoke a reaction. "Don't tell me what to do. I'm not afraid of you." Even now, Seagal said nothing more. His restraint was unnerving. The other passengers felt it. That mental trap where the aggressor suddenly realizes they're the one being measured, judged, and contained. Whispers spread through the cabin. "Why isn't he reacting? He's not scared. Who is this guy?" The passenger doubled down, shouting, gesturing wildly. Sweat began forming on his brow, but his pride would not allow him to back down. He glanced around, expecting support from the surrounding travelers, but all he saw were eyes glued to him in anticipation, phones recording every moment, the silent judgment of the crowd adding invisible pressure. Seagal's calm, controlled presence was more powerful than any physical action. Passengers could feel their hearts racing, a mix of fear and awe. Some were quietly cheering for him, silently rooting for the quiet mastery of self-restraint over reckless aggression. Others were frozen, unsure if an escalation was coming. If you were on this plane, what would you do right now? Comment below, would you stay calm like Seagal or confront the passenger? The rude man's frustration was reaching a breaking point. Every second of silence, every moment that Seagal did not react, fed the fire inside him. His face reddened, his voice cracked with emotion. He had expected a reaction, expected fear or submission. Instead, he was being trapped, mentally, emotionally, socially, by a man who refused to engage on his terms. Seagal's calm was not passive. It was strategic. Every inch of restraint was a lesson in control. Every second of silence, a psychological weight pressing down on the aggressor. The cabin had become a stage, and every passenger was acutely aware of the dynamics. One man's ego versus another's mastery. Aggression versus composure. The passengers' shouting grew louder, but his words were losing their impact. The crowd sensed a shift. The energy in the room had changed. What started as a passenger trying to dominate someone else had transformed into a tense spectacle where the aggressor himself was under scrutiny. Every eye in the cabin was on him, silently demanding he reconsider, step back, or face the consequences of his unchecked rage. And just when it seemed like the tension could explode at any moment, Seagal's subtle shift, a quiet, controlled movement of his hand, hinted that the balance was about to change. The rude passenger had underestimated him completely, and the audience could feel it in their gut. The moment of reckoning was coming. The stage was set. The passenger had doubled down. The plane, the people, the very air around them seemed to hold its breath. And Steven Seagal, calm, commanding, and unshaken, was ready to turn the tables in a way no one would see coming. The cabin had transformed. What had started as a minor squabble now carried the weight of something far larger. Passengers no longer shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They leaned in, eyes wide, phones raised, some barely daring to breathe. Every subtle movement, every glance carried meaning. The rude passenger, red-faced and trembling with frustration, had reached a point where anger alone could no longer fuel him. Every shove, every raised voice was met with Seagal's unyielding calm. And in that calm, a strange, almost invisible power radiated, the kind of power that makes people notice even when they don't yet know why. A soft whisper traveled through the cabin, almost unnoticed at first. Wait, that voice, that presence, it's him. Heads turned, passengers exchanging quick glances. A woman near the middle of the plane murmured to her friend, almost in disbelief, That's Steven Seagal, isn't it? The whisper spread, growing louder with each passing second. No way, that's Steven Seagal. From the movies? The martial arts guy? For a moment, the rude passenger didn't notice the stir. He was too focused on his own ego, on trying to assert dominance, on forcing fear out of Seagal. But the moment he glanced up and saw the shocked expressions, the whispered exclamations, the phones raised and pointed at him, something inside him faltered. Passengers who had been recording the scene now whispered to each other excitedly, confirming what everyone was realizing. This was no ordinary man. This was a legend, a martial arts master, a man whose reputation for calm and control preceded him in stories, movies, and documentaries alike. Even the flight attendants, who had been tense and uncertain moments ago, now shared glances of recognition. Their eyes widened, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This was not just a confrontation. This was history unfolding at 30,000 feet. Yet Seagal, as always, did not change. He remained calm, measured, unreadable. He didn't smile, didn't boast, didn't even look triumphant. To the passengers, that was the most terrifying and awe-inspiring part of all. He wasn't using his fame or his skills to intimidate. He was letting his mere presence, his mastery of self, speak for itself. The rude passenger, now beginning to grasp the situation, felt the first stirrings of fear. Pride still chained him, but he could sense the shift, not in Seagal, but in everyone around him. The energy in the cabin had turned against him. Every eye was silently judging. Every whisper chipped away at his confidence. He was alone, surrounded by witnesses to his arrogance. Seagal's eyes met the passengers briefly. A single calm glance, nothing more. Yet in that glance lay years of experience, training, and discipline. It was a glance that communicated clearly, "You've made a mistake, and now you must live with it." The audience, both on the plane and those watching later through recordings, could feel the intensity of the moment. There was no violence yet, no dramatic blow, but the mental and emotional tension had reached its peak. Every passenger was trapped in the moment, fully aware that the rude man had underestimated the wrong person, and that the consequences were inevitable. If you were on this plane and suddenly realized this was Steven Seagal, what would your first reaction be? Type it in the comments. The rude passenger tried to speak, to recover some dignity, but the words stumbled out, weak and uncertain. He was no longer in control. The crowd, now fully aware of Seagal's identity, watched silently but intently. They knew, just as Seagal did, that the next move would determine the rest of the flight. For the first time, the passenger's aggression faltered. Pride and ego battled fear and respect inside him. And while he struggled with that internal conflict, Steven Seagal remained calm, composed, and in full control, the master of the mental and emotional battlefield. The whispers grew louder. Phones continued to record, and the rude passenger finally realized he had walked into a situation far bigger than himself. The stage was set, recognition had occurred, and the audience, both on the plane and later online, was about to witness a lesson in calm mastery, restraint, and the subtle power of presence. The cabin remained tense, a mix of fear, anticipation, and disbelief hanging in the air. Every passenger's eyes were glued to the unfolding scene. The rude man, now pale and hesitant, had begun to realize that he was no longer in control. The murmurs had grown louder, the phones were raised higher, and every whisper carried one clear message: he is not what you think he is. For the first time, the rude passenger felt the weight of the situation press down on him. His chest heaved with frustration, confusion, and the faintest hint of fear. He had expected compliance, maybe a muttered apology or hesitation, but never this. Never a calm, unshakable presence that seemed to measure every inch of his body, his intentions, and his ego at once. Seagal finally moved, though still slowly and deliberately. He leaned slightly forward in his seat, hands resting calmly on his knees, his gaze locked on the passenger. Then, in a voice that was low but filled with undeniable authority, he spoke. "Sir, you have chosen aggression over reason. You have acted without respect, without thought, and without awareness of how your actions affect everyone around you." The cabin fell utterly silent. Every passenger leaned closer, some unconsciously holding their breath. Even the flight attendants paused mid-step, recognizing the gravity of Seagal's words. The rude passenger sputtered, trying to regain his arrogance, but his words came out broken, weak, and hollow. I didn't mean..." Seagal raised a single hand, a subtle motion that halted the man in place. "Do not speak," he said quietly but firmly. "You have been witnessed. You have been recorded. Your choices, your aggression, and your lack of control are now plain to everyone here. And yet, I offer you the same chance I offer all people. Pause. Reflect. Respect yourself, and respect those around you." A ripple of awe passed through the cabin. Some passengers whispered, "Did he just command him with words?" Others nodded silently, realizing they were witnessing a master at work. The rude passenger's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, ready to argue, but could not find words that mattered. The weight of Seagal's presence and calm reasoning pinned him in place. Seagal's gaze did not waver. It was steady, measured, and sharp, communicating more than words could convey. Every second of silence between his statements amplified the passenger's anxiety. The man was trapped, mentally, emotionally, and socially, by the quiet authority of someone who had faced far greater conflicts than a flight delay and a personal insult. Then Seagal added, his tone unchanging, calm, and deliberate. "Violence and aggression are easy. Respect, restraint, and control require strength. Choose wisely." Every word, landed like a weight on the rude passenger's shoulders. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, their judgment heavy and unwavering. The whispers of recognition grew louder. That's Steven Seagal, the martial arts master, the man who never loses control. The passenger's anger faltered entirely. Pride and ego, which had fueled him until now, began to crumble under the combined pressure of social scrutiny and Seagal's quiet mastery. He shifted in his seat nervously, no longer sure of what to do. Seagal, still seated, did not need to raise a hand. His calm voice, his measured gaze, and his unshakable composure had turned the tables completely. The aggressive passenger, once loud and domineering, was now shrinking under the weight of quiet authority. The cabin had become a courtroom of mental and emotional mastery, with Seagal holding the ultimate power, not through violence, but through discipline, presence, and words. Have you ever seen someone command respect without raising a hand? Comment yes or no, and tell me what you would do in this moment. Passengers whispered, phones recorded, and the rude man sat frozen, trapped not by force but by the undeniable lesson. Arrogance and aggression cannot stand against calm mastery and quiet authority. The tension reached its peak the moment before the final revelation, as Seagal's presence dominated the entire cabin. What would happen next? The rude passenger's full realization and the reaction of the surrounding crowd was about to unfold in a way that would shock everyone on board. The cabin had become a theater of silence. Every passenger was holding their breath, watching the intense confrontation unfold. The rude passenger, once so confident, now sat frozen, the weight of the situation pressing down on him from every direction. Even the flight attendants, who had nervously hovered nearby moments ago, now looked on with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Then it happened. A passenger in the back, who had been quietly observing the escalating drama, leaned toward their friend and whispered loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Wait, isn't that Steven Seagal?" The words spread through the cabin like wildfire. "No way, that's him. The martial arts master. From the movies?" Phones clicked and cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail. The whispers escalated into murmurs, and soon the entire cabin was buzzing with excitement and realization. The rude passenger's arrogance, already wavering, began to crumble. His chest tightened as he finally realized the full weight of his miscalculation. He had not just confronted a calm man. He had confronted a legend, a master of martial arts and composure, a man who had spent decades mastering discipline and restraint. Seagal's calm gaze remained fixed on him, unflinching, as if daring the passenger to speak another word. But no words came. Every passenger could feel the shift. The rude man had lost not just the moral high ground, but every ounce of control. A flight attendant, now fully aware of Seagal's identity, stepped forward subtly, adding authority to the situation. "Sir, please take your seat and respect your fellow passengers," she said, her tone firm but polite. The rude passenger swallowed hard. His face was pale, beads of sweat forming along his temple. He had been trapped, not by fists, not by shouting, but by sheer presence, calm mastery, and the undeniable recognition of everyone around him. Every eye in the cabin silently judged him. Every phone captured his humiliation, and every whisper magnified his error. Seagal finally broke the silence. His voice, still calm, but carrying an undeniable authority, filled the cabin. Respect is not earned through aggression. Strength is not measured by who you can intimidate. It is measured by restraint, by the choices you make under pressure, and by how you treat others. The passengers murmured in agreement, some nodding subtly, some leaning forward, captivated. Phones continued to record, not a single second being wasted. The rude passenger now slumped in his seat, the fight gone from him, replaced by a mix of embarrassment, awe, and realization. Some passengers quietly whispered to each other, "He didn't even have to hit him," and look at the reaction. That's true mastery. Even those who had initially been irritated or annoyed by the disturbance now watched in silent admiration. They had witnessed something rare, the full extent of quiet authority mastery of self, and emotional intelligence. Seagal's restraint had taught the rude passenger, and everyone watching, a lesson in humility and respect. Have you ever seen someone instantly regret their actions? Type yes or no in the comments. Would you have the courage to stay calm like this? The rude passenger finally looked down, shoulders slumping, no words to salvage pride or dignity. Meanwhile, Seagal leaned back slightly, his expression calm, controlled, and utterly unshakable. The cabin, once tense and chaotic, now hummed with relief, admiration, and an unspoken understanding. The moment was over, but the lesson would last far longer. Phones would capture this story and share it with the world. Whispers of awe and respect spread through the cabin, reaching even those who hadn't been paying attention. The rude passenger's error had been publicly exposed, and the audience, both in the cabin and soon online, recognized the incredible power of composure, mastery, and quiet authority. As the plane continued its flight, passengers exchanged looks of admiration and relief. Some even shook their heads in disbelief. Everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, a confrontation that could have turned violent, yet was resolved entirely through calm, control, and the power of presence. The tables had turned completely. The arrogant passenger had been humbled, the audience had been captivated, and Seagal had, once again, demonstrated why he was not just a martial artist, but a master of human behavior and psychological control. The plane had returned to a sense of calm, but the atmosphere was different now, charged, almost electric. Passengers were still catching their breath, whispers rippling quietly through the cabin. Phones continued to record, capturing the final moments of a confrontation that had shifted from chaos to awe. The rude passenger slumped in his seat, humiliation written across his face. His anger, which had once driven him to slap and provoke, had been completely replaced by disbelief and regret. Every glance from the passengers reminded him of the lesson he had just learned. Arrogance and aggression are powerless against calm, disciplined mastery. Steven Seagal remained seated, composed, his gaze sweeping across the cabin. He said nothing more, but the weight of his presence spoke louder than words ever could. Every passenger felt it, the subtle message that true power is quiet, unassuming, and grounded in control. The man who tried to dominate through aggression was now a cautionary example of impulsiveness and pride. The murmurs among the passengers grew, not in judgment, but in admiration. "I can't believe he stayed so calm," one whispered. "Not a single move out of place. That's incredible," said another. "They didn't even need to intervene. He handled it himself," noted a flight attendant. By the time the plane landed, the story had already begun to spread. Passengers whispered to neighbors, showing the videos they had recorded, replaying the moments that had left them stunned. Social media would soon amplify these clips, millions of viewers ready to marvel at the calm authority that had neutralized aggression mid-flight. Even for those watching later online, the mental and emotional lessons were clear. Patience, restraint, and composure can outweigh raw anger. Seagal's response was not about proving dominance, but about teaching respect, a lesson delivered subtly, yet powerfully, in real time before an entire audience. The rude passenger, meanwhile, was left to reflect on his choices. He had underestimated a man who could have responded with aggression, but instead demonstrated strength in a way that required no violence. Every eye in the cabin had witnessed it. Every recording preserved it. He had been humbled, and the lesson would stay with him forever. If you believe no one should be judged by aggression or ego, type respect in the comments below. Could you remain calm under pressure like Seagal? The passengers disembarked with a renewed sense of awe, still discussing the scene. Many would share the story online, turning it into a viral moment that reached far beyond the plane. Millions would see the footage, comment, and debate, but one thing remained consistent. Steven Seagal's calm authority and disciplined mastery had left an unforgettable impression. In the end, the lesson was simple but profound. Aggression can grab attention for a moment, but true mastery commands respect indefinitely. Strength isn't measured by the ability to intimidate. It is measured by the ability to maintain composure, even when provoked, and to let integrity guide every action. And as the world watched the videos spread across social media, millions recognized what the passengers on that plane had already felt. There are few things more powerful than restraint, humility, and mastery in the face of chaos. The story didn't end on the plane. It lived on in the recordings, the shares, and the lessons learned by everyone who witnessed it. And the lesson was universal. Respect, composure, and self-mastery are the true marks of strength.